Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues. The translation is okay? Samia?
شو لا راح يجيبها بس تجيب
Moi, tu parles l'arabe et classique. Un petit peu, mais l'arabe classique, c'est difficile. La peine à suivre. Je crois qu'il va parler en français. Le Marocain, j'imagine, il va parler en français, j'imagine. Il va parler en français, mais lui, il va parler en français. C'est français en vrai. Il y a une panique générale. Oui. Ok, en fonction, c'est
Je crois qu'on peut commencer. Excellences, Messieurs, Mesdames, ambassadeurs, Mesdames, Messieurs, chers amis, chers collègues, permettez-moi en premier lieu de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cette rencontre qui constitue la troisième de genre et la dernière en préparation à la troisième rencontre de Glion qui sera organisée par la Suisse et la Norvège à Vevey les 2 et 3 mai prochains. Peu de jours nous séparent de cet important rendez-vous qui constituera, à ne point en douter, une étape majeure dans la réflexion sur les voies de faire des normes internationales une réalité locale. Je souhaiterais rendre hommage à mes collègues les ambassadeurs de Mexique et de Thaïlande qui ont abrité les 2 premières rencontres préparatoires qui ont connu des débats particulièrement riches et denses. Il ne fait aucun doute que votre présence aujourd'hui témoigne de l'importance que revêt cette thématique. Le Conseil des droits de l'homme, qui fête cette année son 10e anniversaire, est à la croisée des chemins. L'heure est donc propice pour une introspection collective. Excellence, le Royaume du Maroc, en tant que membre actif du Conseil des droits de l'homme, s'est fixé un certain nombre de priorités thématiques qu'il va porter au Conseil. Parmi ces priorités figure le renforcement des architectures nationales des droits de l'homme. Nous avons toujours été convaincus que ce sont les efforts nationaux qui passent par l'ancrage d'une culture des droits de l'homme dans les sociétés qui sont seuls à induire l'appropriation nationale des droits de l'homme. Les architectures nationales des droits de l'homme incluent les institutions nationales des droits de l'homme, les mécanismes gouvernementaux de coordination des droits de l'homme, les parlements et leur interaction avec ces 2 acteurs et la société civile. Permettez-moi de faire un rapide survol des architectures nationales des droits de l'homme à travers le monde. En premier lieu, il existe 106 institutions nationales des droits de l'homme, dont 71 sont accréditées par le Global Alliance for National Human Rights Institutions et sont pleinement conformes au principe de Paris, tandis que 25 institutions nationales sont de niveau B. L'une des questions qui pourrait être posée est comment permettre à un nombre plus large d'accréditation au statut à l'INDH. Deuxièmement, il y a 47 mécanismes de coordination gouvernementale dans le monde. Les déclinaisons de ces mécanismes sont variées, mais leur existence même permet une amélioration de la coordination des différents départements ministériels et une meilleure préparation des rapports nationaux étudiés aux organes de traité et dans l'interaction avec les procédures spéciales. En dernier lieu, les différentes composantes des architectures nationales des droits de l'homme s'engagent de plus en plus dans des coopérations renforcées, à l'instar de l'établissement du principe de Belgrade, qui permettent de construire des synergies entre les parlements et les institutions nationales des droits de l'homme. Nous sommes particulièrement honorés aujourd'hui par la présence de ces 4 acteurs qui nous livreront leur expérience, les bonnes pratiques qu'ils ont développées et les défis qu'ils ont. Chers collègues, c'est conscient du rôle critique joué par les institutions nationales des droits de l'homme, les parlements, les mécanismes gouvernementaux de coordination des droits de l'homme et la société civile que le Royaume du Maroc a initié la résolution sur l'institution de l'ombudsman, médiateur et autres institutions nationales de défense des droits de l'homme. Initié avec l'Équateur la résolution sur la contribution des parlements en matière de protection et de promotion des droits de l'homme. Soutenu la résolution de Brésil et de Paraguay sur le rôle des mécanismes nationaux de coordination dans le domaine des droits de l'homme. Appuyé fortement la résolution présentée par l'Australie sur les institutions nationales des droits de l'homme. À ce stade, permettez-moi une réflexion sur le manque d'espace accordé par le Conseil des droits de l'homme aux institutions nationales des droits de l'homme lors de ces sessions. Je suis personnellement choqué que les institutions nationales des droits de l'homme n'ont pas la place qui leur revient de droit et qu'ils méritent au sein du Conseil des droits de l'homme. Car grâce à leur indépendance, ces institutions jouent un rôle important dans la promotion et la protection des droits de l'homme. Cette réflexion s'applique davantage à New York, où les débats de la 3e commission ne permettent aucune participation effective des institutions nationales des droits de l'homme. Ces questions et réflexions méritent d'être posées et partagées, car le Maroc est convaincu que le Conseil des droits de l'homme doit éviter le syndrome de la bulle genevoise. Il doit se rapprocher des acteurs clés nationaux dans la mise en œuvre et la coordination dans le domaine des droits de l'homme, car l'objectif commun est partagé par la promotion et la protection des droits de l'homme. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Je cède la parole au modérateur de cette séance, notre ami et collègue Hani Malik. À vous la parole.
Thank you, Ambassador Ojar. A very good summing up, I think a very good introduction to this very important meeting. Of course, we need to be thanking the permanent mission of the Kingdom of Morocco and Ambassador Ojar in particular, who, I don't know if most of you are aware, was also a human rights minister in Morocco and helped establish with the United Nations a human rights documentation and training center in Rabat. And the human rights the Universal Rights Group, I was going to say the Human Rights Group, the Universal Rights Group, who are also co-hosting this particular policy dialogue as part of the preparation for the Glion Human Rights Dialogue, which is happening next month. The time is very short, so I will hand over to Dr. Ahmed Shahid, who is the chair of and founder of the Board of Trustees of the Universal Rights Group, and most of you will know is also the Special Rapporteur on Iran for a few introductory remarks. Please, Dr. Shahid.
Thank you, Madam. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, this meeting is very well attended, so thank you for presence. Let me also apologize for the discomfort some of you are facing because of that. I come to Geneva wearing many hats, and as you heard today, I'm here for the URG, and we're very pleased to join the Moroccan mission in co-hosting this dialogue, the policy dialogue, the fourth and final dialogue to be held ahead of the third Glion Human Rights Dialogue next month, which URG is again pleased to co-organize with Norway and Switzerland. I would at the outset like to thank the Ambassador of Morocco again and all our friends and colleagues from the Mission of Morocco for co-organizing and co-hosting this meeting today. I would like to recognize and express appreciation for the fact that the Mission of Morocco has arranged for reps of NHRIs and national implementation, coordination and reporting structures to be with us here today. When one considers that the aim of this year's Glion next month is to take a bottom-up approach to the question of implementation, their presence here today is both welcome and crucial. I don't wish to give a long oration today. We all here, after all, to hear from you, not from the URG. Therefore, I will restrict my comments to just introducing four broad questions that I think we should focus in time that's left for us. The first, of course, is what are the different models and strategies adopted by states to coordinate implementation? What happens to the recommendations coming out of the UN human rights mechanisms once they have been transmitted to the concerned states delegation in Geneva? How do states seek to analyze and process them and feed recommendations into relevant domestic policy-making processes? In answering these questions, today's meeting will seek to draw particular attention to the emergence and evolution of what is called National Implementation, Coordination and Reporting Structures, NICRS to have a new acronym. National processes, strategies or mechanisms established to translate international recommendations into better national laws and practices. To provide an overview of these emerging structures, we will later hear from OHCHR's Treaty Body Division, which has recently completed a multi-year survey of NICRS around the world. What are different NICRS models being put up in place by various states? What should be the legal basis of such structures? Who should be challenging them? For example, should prime ministers or other ministers be doing them, or secretaries? Which ministries and state agencies should be involved and at what level? What is the relationship with the National Human Rights Action Plans? How practically should NICRS engage and involve, among others, parliamentarians, judges, lawyers, NHRIs, and civil society? Can we identify any key principles for building effective NICRS and perhaps codify them into some guidelines such as the Paris principles for the NHRIs? The second question we should focus our minds today, I think, is how to strengthen the role of parliaments in implementing UN recommendations. The parliamentary branch of government must necessarily play an important role in implementing UN human rights recommendations. Many of these recommendations require new or revised legislation. Indeed, by some estimates, as many as 50% of UPR recommendations accepted require legislative action in order for them to be implemented. Parliaments can also play an important role in overseeing government implementation and compliance with the international obligations. It is also important to note that implementation of international human rights recommendations often requires national budget appropriations, again requiring parliamentary engagement on that. And yet parliaments are still regularly excluded from decision-making during all stages of state engagement with international human rights instruments and mechanisms, sometimes even from signature ratification to reporting and through implementation and compliance. How can therefore the international community promote the systematic and routine engagement of parliaments in domestic efforts to implement UN human rights recommendations? What national good practices can be identified in engaging parliaments in national implementation, coordination and reporting processes? How can parliaments' oversight powers be engaged to strengthen domestic scrutiny over non-compliance or compliance? The third set of questions I think we need to address is how to mobilize domestic civil society to press for and independently monitor or report on implementation. Long after a treaty body has turned attention to the next reporting state or a special procedure, and it has presented his or her country mission to the next mission, NGOs, local NGOs have a crucial role to play in encouraging or pressing governments to implement the recommendations that these mechanisms have created or made. Domestic NGOs are ideally placed due to their on-the-ground presence and continuous engagement as well as expertise to independently monitor and report on implementation. Therefore, what can be done at the national level to support and strengthen the role of civil society in following up on UN recommendations? Is there a need for improved guidance and capacity building assistance? Who should offer such guidance and support? The Council or the UPR guide, the Council, or the procedures, or NHRIs, UN country teams, or civil society themselves? And finally, the fourth cluster of questions revolve around how can the unique role of NHRIs be leveraged to support, monitor, and report on implementation. The Council has recognized in Resolution 2718 the role of NHRIs in working together with their governments to ensure full respect for human rights at the national level, including by contributing to follow-up actions as appropriate to the recommendations resulting from international human rights mechanisms. But how precisely, therefore, do NHRIs play this role? How do they support the implementation of UN human rights recommendations? How do they monitor and measure implementation compliance and impact? And what is their role in domestic and international reporting policies, both on their own account and as a facilitator of reporting by civil society? There are some good practice examples. What are these from around the world in terms of NHRIs fulfilling this follow-up and coordination role? How can those examples be codified and replicated elsewhere? You'll hear from three important case studies today, and the discussion that follows. I'm sure you'll be able to identify some key points that will be worth following up subsequently. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shahid. You've nicely framed the discussion today and where it fits into the bigger discussion that will be also happening next month, Glion. I'll be very brief. I'm down for remarks, but I realize time is short, so I'm going to cut them. Ambassador Ojar has really already pointed to the enormous progress that's been made at the international level. The Universal Periodic Review, 193 member states have now nearly completed the second round, the universal assessment of implementations around the world, the special procedures. We now have 55 special procedure mandates, the treaty body system, which is really expanded in a few years to 172 experts today. The number of national human rights institutions has also grown, so we now have 111 today, I think. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has also grown. We have, I think, 58 presences around the world today, pending, of course, the reorganization that's going on. To add to that, we have human rights mainstreamed within the UN system. We have human rights components in peacekeeping operations, human rights advisors within UN country teams. We have the Rights Upfront initiative that's meant to pull the various parts of the UN house together. And of course, beyond the UN, we've seen the development of international law to achieve accountability for massive human rights abuses with the establishment of the International Court in 2002. And we've seen the growth of sophisticated justice mechanisms around transitional justice, truth commissions, reparations programs, vetting programs, etc. But is the world a safer world today? I think the answer is we don't feel it's a safer world today. And the challenges, I think, that we're seeing growing have as much to do with what's happening on the ground within countries. The rise in conflict and terrorist attacks have raised major challenges to human rights norms who have come under pressure, efforts at compromises for political considerations on issues such as immigration, the war on terror. I don't like to use the term the war, but that's the term that's being used. Minority protection, digital mass surveillance, private military contractors. All of these are issues that countries are facing on the ground in the last few years. Even I think the successes of International Criminal Court are being questioned in terms of the credibility of the court, the constraints of the statutes of the court, the ability of President Bashir, for example, to be able to travel even though there's an arrest warrant. The failure to have Syria referred to the ICC by the Security Council. All of these, I think, point to the fact that we still have a long way to go in discussing human rights protections, and it brings us back to looking at what's happening on the ground within the countries. Today, I think we're going to try to focus on, and we were reminded by the organizers that in 2006, then Secretary General Kofi Annan called on the Human Rights Council to take us from the era of declaration to the era of implementation. Today we want to focus on implementation on the ground. What are the strategies and models being followed? What's worked, what's not worked? What are the challenges and the obstacles to human rights protections? How is the international community able to help those developments on the ground? We're going to focus on 4 areas, as you can see in the time given. The roles of parliaments, the roles of national human rights institutions, the evolution now and increasing role of national implementation, coordination and reporting structures, and of course the important role of civil society in all of this. I will immediately, I think, take us into the first session, which will be the role of parliaments and national human rights institutions in national implementation, monitoring and reporting. And I will look to the first discussants on the ratification, legislation, oversight and reporting, role of parliaments in promoting national implementation. This will be the Secretary of the Committee of Human Rights of the Parliamentarians, the IPU, Mr. Roger Vizenga. Voilà, there you go. Excellent. You have 10 minutes. I can see on the schedule. I know time is very short, but if you could stay within that, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, first of all, a big thank you to the organizers for doing this meeting, particularly the Kingdom of Morocco, the ambassador, of course also the Universal Rights Group, and for inviting the IPU to take part in this meeting. The IPU Secretary General sends his regrets. He would have very much liked to participate in this meeting himself. He's asked me to be here in his stead as the one who leads the IPU's Human Rights Program. I would like to say some remarks about the role of parliaments in international human rights mechanisms. I want to say maybe, first of all, a couple of words about why it is so important that parliaments are fully part and parcel of national implementation plans and structures, and how that is relevant to the work that is being done by international human rights mechanisms. I want to say something very shortly about where we have come from and where we are at now, and maybe share finally some lessons that the IPU has been able to draw when it comes to the work of parliaments but maybe also more generally when it comes to how international human rights mechanisms can engage more with partners, because I think there are important lessons that can be drawn there as well. First of all, it's very nice to see how the role of parliaments is explicitly mentioned here in the title of the presentation. And it's clear, as has been clearly stated, many of the international recommendations and actions require some kind of follow-up in which parliaments need to be involved, whether it's through legislation ratification or their oversight functions, or also the budget, for which they also have important responsibilities. This is something that the IPU has always tried to promote: parliamentary engagement with international human rights mechanisms, particularly the different reporting procedures that exist in the UPR, but of course also the treaty bodies, to make sure that parliaments take part in the different stages of the reporting procedure, whether it's at the time of the drafting of the report, that needs to be consulted on the report, the presentation of the report in Geneva or elsewhere, but also maybe most importantly the follow-up of the recommendations that come out of these international discussions. We've said that because Parliament has important prerogatives in that sense, but it's not only that, it's also because we believe that often human rights issues require important political choices and debates. So what we have seen for maybe too long is that rather than embracing this political debate, recognizing that it is valid to have a public political debate around human rights issues, some of which may be very sensitive, it was often left more in the hands of bureaucrats to manage human rights issues. And that was sometimes to the detriment of having that debate in publicly, and with Parliament being an important public platform for organizing it. And another aspect, which we've also realized and mentioned in the past, is that parliaments are also important to make sure that what is perceived often as a democratic deficit in implementation and in these international discussions is somehow addressed by making sure that public opinion can also be rallied around the common cause, around recommendations that come out of international human rights mechanisms, and also that there is a common cause is found through Parliament and galvanizing public opinion in support of implementation. So these are important elements that we think one should bear in mind. Now, where have we come? As I said before, the IPU has been promoting parliamentary engagement for a long time. The problem was, at the very start, it was very hard to see to what extent parliaments were in fact aware of international human rights mechanisms and to what extent they were actually involved. There was little information available. So we, as an international organization representing 170 national parliaments, we also had to first of all start collecting this kind of data because it was largely absent. And what we've realized at the start is that, yes, parliaments were often unaware of international human rights treaties, which may sound as a surprise because they are the ones who often end up ratifying them at the national level. They are often unaware of international human rights mechanisms and how they can possibly engage with them. And they are unaware of the role they can play in implementation. But what we have seen over the years is that there has been a gradual shift and that there has been much more parliamentary awareness of the existence of these mechanisms and also the role that they can potentially play, which is also why we are, as an organization as well, much more in a position to point out specific examples where parliaments have been able to play a key role. With that, I would like to mention a couple of lessons that we have been able to draw when it comes to the importance of parliaments. The first one, which is maybe a bit of an open door, but it's an important one all the same, which is that, of course, if you want parliamentary involvement, that first of all requires strong and effective parliaments. Parliaments that are effective not just on paper, but of course are also effective in practice. I mean, they have to have the requisite constitutional powers clearly described and presented in legislation. But also, of course, the parliaments need to be able to use those functions fully in order to be effective. And that's an area in which the IPU is trying to be as helpful as it can vis-à-vis its own member parliaments, trying to make sure that parliaments have the national capacity to be effective when it comes to legislation, to be effective when it comes to parliamentary oversight. We're working together with UNDP to produce later this year a report exactly on the issue of parliamentary oversight, something which is often perceived to be something very vague, but parliamentarians have concrete tools that they can use in order to hold governments to account. So this is an important first lesson. Secondly, when it comes to human rights specifically, what we have seen is that it makes a tremendous difference if the proper structures and processes are in place within Parliament for it to contribute to human rights. And this is particularly true when it comes to the existence of parliamentary human rights committees. Quite a number of parliaments have decided to set up these dedicated human rights structures in Parliament. And this can really make all the difference. Because if you have a dedicated structure in Parliament, then of course you have an obvious entry point as well for follow-up and for parliamentary preparation in the work of the international human rights mechanism, including in the work of the coordination mechanisms that have increasingly been set up. Now I must add as well at the same time that this raises complicated issues as well, because of course Parliament, I've just mentioned, parliamentary oversight is important, which means that Parliament needs to keep a sufficient distance from what the government is doing. So involving parliaments too much in these coordination mechanisms may, some argue, jeopardize the independence of Parliament. So it's very important to strike a fine line between parliamentary involvement at these preliminary stages, at these first stages, but also allowing Parliament to be critical of what comes out of national consultations, but also national implementation initiatives. It's not just structures, it's also processes. What we see is that in an increasing number of parliaments are trying to make sure that all legislation is being reviewed from a human rights perspective. Now, by doing that, again, this can happen through dedicated national human rights committees in Parliament, but also through other ways. Parliaments can try to make sure that all legislation is looked at from a human rights angle. And we have seen that this can also make a tremendous difference. What is important in this is, and that makes me return to the issue of the effectiveness of Parliament, is of course that the opposition in these mechanisms, in these processes, has its rightful place. In some countries, human rights committees in Parliament are in fact led by a member of the opposition. And this can also help make sure that these committees have a bit further teeth. Another important lesson is that parliaments, of course, shouldn't be working in a vacuum and should be working together with other important national human rights stakeholders, in particular national human rights institutions. The Belgrade principles that were adopted in 2012 provide very clear ideas as to how parliaments and national human rights institutions can work together. But unfortunately, I think it's maybe with the exception of Morocco, where there is in fact which is a shining light in that sense that there is a memorandum of understanding between the Parliament and the National Human Rights Commission. But in many other situations, this kind of sustained dialogue and structure is absent. So I think there is a lot of more work that can be done. And the same applies to the relationship between parliaments and civil society. I think what also needs to be clarified is that each of these actors have complementary roles, have specific expertise, which has to be recognized. There's no competition there. There shouldn't be any competition, and it should really be about aligning these different competencies in order to strive for something that serves the common good. Another important lesson...
I have to just give you one more minute, I'm sorry.
Okay. Very quickly, still when it comes to parliaments, I think we still need to continue raising awareness among parliaments about their role in these mechanisms, and we're doing this more and more with the help of OECHR. Another element where Parliament can make a critical difference is when it comes to ensuring continuity, because if you have these proper structures in place in Parliament, you can make sure that human rights remain on the agenda, on the political agenda. Last point when it comes to Parliament, very briefly, is that what we see as well is that there's a lot of work to be done to change mentalities in Parliament. For parliaments to realize that human rights are important, there's not necessarily an awareness that promoting human rights will give you votes, because its international recommendations are perceived as being drafted far away from day-to-day realities. So I think there's a lot of work that to be done there as well. But now two last recommendations which concern in fact the international human rights mechanisms themselves. It's also there that the IBU thinks that more work can be done. Yes, there has been tremendous progress through the UN Human Rights Council. There's been resolutions, there's been an official panel discussion, there will be another official panel discussion in June. But the Human Rights Council and also treaty bodies can do more to engage directly with parliaments. I want to take the example of CEDAW. CEDAW adopted a statement in 2008 on the relationship between CEDAW and parliaments, which clearly specifies what CEDAW also expects from states. Because again, parliaments are maybe in a bit of a special position. Of course, it's finally incumbent on the states to ensure implementation, and the states are not obliged to involve parliaments. But given that all branches of states are held to implement recommendations, it makes total sense for parliaments to be involved. And CEDAW has acted on that. And with that last comment, I think it would be useful for other treaty bodies, but maybe also the UN Human Rights Council, to look at that concrete example and maybe draw inspiration from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting points. I'll sum up, I think, towards the end so that we can keep the momentum going. I will now pass over to Mr. Gisser Yazami. This is on the role of national human rights institutions in promoting implementation, building capacity for effective civil society monitoring and reporting. Mr. Yazami, as you all know, is president of the National Human Rights Council in Morocco. You may have known him formerly with the FIDH. He's here also representing the Global Alliance of National Human Rights, the former, I think, ICC. Please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs les ambassadeurs, cher Dr Shahid, chers amis, c'est un plaisir de parler et un honneur de parler devant vous au nom du Conseil national des droits de l'homme du Royaume du Maroc, mais aussi au nom de Madame Beat Rudolph, la nouvelle présidente de l'Alliance globale des institutions nationales des droits de l'homme, qui est le nouveau nom du Comité international de coordination qui a été adopté lors de la dernière session du Conseil des droits de l'homme il y a quelques semaines. Ce n'est pas devant vous que je vais rappeler le rôle essentiel et unique des institutions nationales des droits de l'homme, qui jouent un rôle essentiel. Maintenant, leur nombre, comme cela a été rappelé par son Excellence M. Ojar, dépasse la centaine. Il y a leur rôle est de plus en plus actif sur le plan national comme sur le plan international. Leur rôle unique vient aussi de leur capacité de constituer des passerelles uniques entre le gouvernement, les parlements, la société civile et la sphère internationale, et notamment le système des Nations Unies en matière de droits de l'homme. Depuis ces derniers temps, comme vous le savez mieux que moi, plusieurs résolutions du Conseil des droits de l'homme ont rappelé l'importance du rôle des institutions nationales des droits de l'homme. Et récemment, en décembre 2015, l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies a appelé l'ensemble de la communauté internationale, et notamment les mécanismes des Nations Unies en matière de droits de l'homme, à renforcer leur coopération avec les institutions nationales. Je vais essayer de traiter de deux points, mesdames et messieurs. D'une part, de donner quelques exemples concrets du rôle que les institutions nationales des droits de l'homme jouent dans le processus de mise en œuvre des recommandations des organes internationaux en matière de droits de l'homme, et aussi soulever devant vous trois défis essentiels qui me semblent constituer peut-être une matière à discussion lors de cet important atelier. J'aimerais par exemple rappeler très rapidement quelques exemples, comme par exemple le rôle que la Commission nationale des droits de l'homme du Mexique a joué en matière de disparition forcée. Créée en 1990, ayant dans son mandat l'investigation sur la violation grave des droits de l'homme, la CNDH du Mexique a mené un important travail d'investigation en matière de disparition forcée, a appelé à l'adoption, a appelé le Parlement mexicain à l'adoption d'une loi globale sur la question de disparition forcée. Et par exemple, lorsque le gouvernement du Mexique devait présenter son rapport au comité sur la disparition forcée, a présenté devant ce comité son propre rapport indépendant, a pris des contacts avec le comité, a travaillé avec le comité, ce qui a amené le comité en février 2015 à adopter dans ses recommandations, enfin dans ses observations finales, la recommandation de la CNDH mexicaine pour l'adoption d'une loi globale sur la question des disparitions forcées. Un deuxième exemple, par exemple, le processus de ratification, c'est ce que font nos collègues de la CNDH de Thaïlande, qui font partie d'un groupe de travail qui a été établi par le ministère de la Justice pour préparer la ratification par le gouvernement de Thaïlande de la Convention sur les disparitions forcées, qui a en même temps publié, tout en participant à ce groupe de travail établi par le ministère de la Justice, a publié son propre rapport sur toute la mise en œuvre de cette convention au cas de sa ratification. Un autre exemple, c'est le travail immense qu'a fait la défenseuriat du Pérou, qui est l'institution nationale des droits de l'homme du Pérou, notamment avec les populations indigènes, et en lien avec le rapporteur spécial sur le peuple indigène, ce qui a amené à l'adoption d'une loi spécifique en août 2011, demandant qu'il y ait une loi qui garantit notamment le droit à la consultation des populations indigènes dans toute matière les concernant. La CNDH d'Australie, cela vient d'être traité par notre collègue Joseph Izenga de l'Union interparlementaire. La CNDH d'Australie, qui présente, comme le Conseil national des droits de l'homme, un rapport au Parlement, fait le point de manière systématique dans son rapport annuel sur la mise en œuvre des recommandations des organes des traités et de l'UPR. Et donc, par exemple, c'est une bonne pratique que nous-mêmes, je vais intégrer dans mon deuxième rapport devant le Parlement marocain. On vient de parler du Memorandum of Understanding qui est signé entre le Conseil national des droits de l'homme du Maroc et le Parlement marocain. Les principes de Belgrade, à mon avis, constituent un outil essentiel qui est, comme cela vient d'être dit, très peu mis en œuvre malheureusement. Alors, ce qui est facilité concernant le Maroc, peut-être cette signature qui reste assez rare au niveau mondial d'un accord d'entente entre le Parlement et l'institution nationale, c'était le fait que nous avons participé avec d'autres instances constitutionnelles à notre initiative dans le processus d'élaboration du règlement intérieur du Parlement. Il s'est trouvé que l'institution nationale, dans avec ses nouvelles règles, a été créée en 2011, au même moment où nous avions des élections législatives avec un nouveau Parlement, qui devait adopter un nouveau règlement intérieur. Et donc, avec les deux chambres du Parlement, nous avons, à notre initiative, nous sommes allés voir les deux présidents des deux chambres, en leur disant, nous voulons préparer dans le règlement intérieur, et donc il y a cet article dans le règlement intérieur des deux assemblées qui régule les relations entre l'institution nationale des droits de l'homme, les autres instances constitutionnelles, comme par exemple l'instance de lutte contre la corruption et le législatif. Et cela a facilité la signature du Memorandum of Understanding, qui fait qu'aujourd'hui, nous sommes quasi systématiquement saisis par les deux chambres pour donner notre avis, et l'avis de l'Institution nationale des droits de l'homme fait partie du rapport officiel de la Commission. Alors, maintenant, rapidement, trois types de défis, me semble-t-il, qui sont devant nous pour renforcer le rôle des INDH dans le processus de mise en œuvre du droit international des droits de l'homme. Premier défi, il relève des États. Et je profite de cette enceinte pour le dire de manière la plus solennelle, il est encore fondamental que les gouvernements veillent à donner à leurs institutions nationales le cadre légal le plus élargi et conforme aux principes de Paris. Nous savons, et il ne faut pas se le cacher, que c'est loin d'être encore le cas dans beaucoup de pays. Je ne veux, bien évidemment, nous le savons, grâce à l'Alliance globale, grâce aussi aux réseaux régionaux dont nous faisons partie les uns et les autres, les gouvernements ont la responsabilité première de donner le cadre légal conforme aux principes de Paris à leur institution nationale. Sans ce cadre légal, il se serait illusoire de penser que les INDH peuvent jouer un rôle plus important. La deuxième question, elle est évidente, elle est claire, c'est celle de la question des ressources nécessaires pour que les INDH puissent travailler. Je connais moi-même des INDH qui n'ont pas un centime, je dis bien un centime. Et que donc on ne voit pas comment une INDH peut jouer son rôle sans ses ressources. Et troisièmement, on peut avoir un bon cadre légal conforme aux principes de Paris, le statut A, des ressources effectives, ce qui est le cas aussi de beaucoup d'INDH que je connais, mais il s'agit que l'interaction des gouvernements doit être systématique. Je le dis par exemple sans problème pour le cas du Maroc, certains ministres nous consultent, nous envoient leur projet de loi, d'autres ne le font pas. Et heureusement qu'il y a le memorandum of understanding du Parlement qui permet, lorsque un ministre ne vous saisissez pas, en fait c'est la commission du Parlement qui vous saisit. Et donc l'INDH, de toute façon, elle peut s'autosaisir, mais cela donne plus de poids lorsqu'elle est saisie par le Parlement. Deuxième niveau de défi, c'est celui qui relève du système des Nations Unies lui-même. Il est clair qu'aujourd'hui, cela a été dit, je le confirme de manière claire, la place des INDH à Genève est importante, elle est quasi invisible à New York. Et que donc, nous basons sur ce qui vient de se passer avec la résolution de décembre dernier, il faut renforcer absolument la place des INDH à New York. Un dernier exemple, la CSW vient de se terminer cette année. Nous avons pris l'initiative avec l'Australie, le Maroc et l'Allemagne. Et l'Allemagne est de faire un side event à New York sur la question du genre. Les conclusions finales ont signalé ce side event, mais nous ne sommes pas présents dans le processus de la CSW de manière évidente. Et d'ailleurs, je dis bien que ce renforcement au niveau du système des Nations Unies, c'est aussi une responsabilité des INDH. À mon avis, nous devons aussi être plus proactifs en direction du système. Troisième niveau de défi, c'est les responsabilités, les challenges qui nous reviennent à nous, l'Institution nationale des droits de l'homme, avec notamment, la question de la formation, du renforcement qualitatif de notre capacité d'expertise. C'est la raison pour laquelle, tout à l'heure, Hani Magali, il a fait une mention rapide. C'est pour ça que, par exemple, nous travaillons en ce moment pour la consolidation d'un centre national de formation permanent à Rabat, en direction de notre INDH, des membres de notre staff, mais aussi en direction des INDH de la région et d'Afrique notamment. Mais c'est aussi une vraie stratégie de renforcement de nos alliances, comme INDH, en direction des parlements et en direction de la société civile. Il y a toujours ce que moi j'appelle de temps en temps, mesdames et messieurs, l'alchimie de la réforme. L'alchimie de la mise en œuvre, cette alchimie exige de nombreux acteurs, bien évidemment la volonté politique, mais aussi une alliance entre les parlements et l'ensemble des acteurs de la société civile et des INDH. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you very much. You caught me just as I was going to give you one more minute. Thank you very much. I'll quickly move to the third intervention from Dr. Ali Al-Marri, the Chair of the National Human Rights Committee of Qatar. Qatar, as you may all remember, recently I think hosted the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for a big discussion about the role of the office. So over to Qatar.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. كما أشكر سعادة السفير محمد أوجار على دعوتنا لهذا النقاش. سأتحدث عن دور المؤسسات الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان في تعزيز التطبيق ودورها في بناء قدرات المجتمع المدني للرصد وإصدار التقارير. أمام المؤسسات الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان دور كبير لتقوم به في حث الحكومات على تطبيق الاتفاقيات الدولية التي صادقت عليها، وقد حددت مبادئ باريس وملاحظات اللجنة الفرعية للاعتماد التابعة للتحالف الدولي للمؤسسات الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان دورها بوضوح، وكافة المؤسسات الوطنية خاصة الحاصلة على التصنيف A من قبل التحالف ضمنت في قانونها الاختصاصات التي تسمح لها بمراقبة تنفيذ تطبيق الدولة للاتفاقيات الدولية التي صادقت عليها من خلال الرصد المستقل وصلاحيات واسعة تتمتع بها قوانين إنشائها. عندما نتحدث ما الذي تقوم به المؤسسة الوطنية بعد مصادقة الدولة على اتفاقية لحقوق الإنسان، إنها تعمل على عدة محاور. أولها دراسة التشريعات المحلية المرتبطة بالاتفاقية وتقديم توصيات للحكومة لإلقاء أو تعديل أو استحداث مواد قانونية تحقق انسجام التشريع مع الاتفاقية. كذلك دراسة الإجراءات التنفيذية ذات الصلة واقتراح الآليات التنفيذية. وهذا العمل يكون موجها للحكومة والجمهور على حد سواء، حيث تعلن المؤسسة الوطنية في تقريرها السنوي المنشور عدد التشريعات الوطنية التي تعتبرها مخالفة لحقوق الإنسان وتوصياتها بشأنها. من جانب آخر تنظر المؤسسات الوطنية في تقارير المقررين الخواص وملاحظات اللجان التعهدية وتوصيات الاستعراض الدولي الشامل، وتبدأ بفتح قنوات مع الجهات المختصة بالدولة بهدف عقد الجلسات الحوارية ووضع هذه الملاحظات والتوصيات على الطاولة. المؤسسات الوطنية وكونها تتمتع بعلاقة فريدة مع الحكومة ومع المجتمع المدني يجب أن تعرف المعوقات والفرص المتاحة والوسائل الأمثل لدفع عملية التطبيق إلى الأمام. أيضا تقوم المؤسسات بالرصد الميداني كزيارة أماكن الاحتجاز أو رصد مراكز الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة أو أماكن العمل أو سكن العمال وما إلى ذلك. وبناء على الرصد تضع خطط عمل لرصد التنفيذ مرجعيتها أحكام الاتفاقية ذات الصلة وتوصيات الآليات الدولية. وكمثال حي على ذلك تقدمت لجنة معاهدة الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة بتوصيات إلى دولة قطر في عام 2015، من ضمنها أن على المؤسسة الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان أن تقوم بدور أكبر في رصد تطبيق الاتفاقية. فقامت اللجنة الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان بدولة قطر بوضع خطة عمل مدتها 2 سنين تتضمن عدة مراحل، وفي الوقت الحالي هناك عمل على تطبيق توصيتين من توصيات اللجنة التعهدية. الأولى متعلقة بإعداد قاعدة بيانات للأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة، والثانية تتعلق بالحق في الوصول. وقد وضعت اللجنة هذين الموضوعين أمام الجهات المختصة بالحكومة ونسقت اجتماعات مع جميع الأطراف الفاعلة، وهي مستمرة بالمتابعة. وهذا مثال عن الدور الذي يمكن أن تقوم به المؤسسة الوطنية في التركيز على توصية أو أكثر والعمل على تطبيقها ثم الانتقال إلى توصيات أخرى. أيضا المؤسسات الوطنية لديها اختصاص في إعداد تقارير الظل أو التقارير الموازية التي تقدم لآليات حقوق الإنسان في الأمم المتحدة. وهذه التقارير تعكس قدر الموضوعية والمصداقية التي تتمتع بها المؤسسة. وبعض المؤسسات تقدم تقارير ظل لا تختلف عن التقارير الحكومية، وهذا خطأ وعدم إدراك للدور المنوط بها. بل على المؤسسة أن تكون مصدرا مستقلا للمعلومات وأن تقدم وجهة نظر تعكس استقلالها عن الحكومة. أما فيما يتعلق بدور المؤسسات الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان في بناء قدرات المجتمع المدني للرصد وإصدار التقارير، لقد حددت مبادئ باريس التي تنظم إنشاء المؤسسات الوطنية أساليب عمل هذه المؤسسات، ومن ضمنها العلاقة مع المجتمع المدني. وفي النص أن تعمد المؤسسات الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان إلى إقامة علاقات مع المنظمات غير الحكومية لتعزيز وحماية حقوق الإنسان وللتنمية الاقتصادية والاجتماعية ومكافحة التمييز. لذا يتعين أن يحدد القانون التنظيمي لأي مؤسسة وطنية لحقوق الإنسان اختصاصها بالتعاون مع المجتمع المدني، وبالتالي على المؤسسة أن تقيم شراكات أو توقع مذكرات تفاهم أو تتعاون ضمن أنشطة وبرامج مع المنظمات غير الحكومية والمنظمات المهنية والاتحادات العمالية والأفراد والمؤسسات ذات التوجهات الفلسفية أو الدينية وكذلك الجامعات، وذلك وفقا لملاحظات لجنة الاعتماد. وللعلاقة مع المجتمع المدني وجهان: الوجه الأول هو الذي تقوم المؤسسات الوطنية من خلاله بالاستفادة من الخبرات المتراكمة المتوفرة في منظمات المجتمع المدني. وكمثال على ذلك عقدنا نحن في اللجنة الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان بقطر شراكة مع المركز الأمريكي للتضامن العمالي، وقد نتج عن هذه الشراكة استضافة اللجنة موظف من المركز ليعمل على رفع القدرات والتدريب ووضع البرامج فيما يتعلق بحماية حقوق العمال في قطر. أما الوجه الثاني فهو استفادة منظمات المجتمع المدني من المؤسسة الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان. وكمثال على ذلك نتلقى في اللجنة الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان العديد من الطلبات من مؤسسات المجتمع المدني داخل الدولة وخارجها، التعاون والتدريب، وفي بعض الأحيان الحصول على الاستشارة أو مراقبة الانتخابات وغير ذلك. ومن الأمثلة الجيدة في هذا الموضوع هو إجراء اللجنة الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان في قطر بالتعاون مع الشبكة العربية للمؤسسات الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان دورة تدريبية في العام 2014 لرفع القدرات في الرصد وإعداد التقارير، بدءا من التقارير الدورية والسنوية المتعلقة بحقوق الإنسان إلى تقارير الظل التي تقدم إلى الاستعراض الدولي الشامل والآليات التعاونية. وقد شارك فيها ممثلون عن عدد كبير من المؤسسات الوطنية ومؤسسات المجتمع المدني، منهم مختصون ومنهم موظفون ومنتسبون جدد. وناقشت الدورة الصعوبات والتحديات التي تواجه المجتمع المدني في الرصد وإعداد التقارير، وكان أهمها نقص الخبرات ونقص المساحة المتاحة من الحرية ورقابة الحكومة على تقارير المجتمع المدني وردود الفعل المحتملة إليها. الخبرات المطلوبة ليست فقط في ميدان إعداد التقارير ومعايير حقوق الإنسان، إنما الخبرة في كيفية التعامل مع الحكومة وكيفية وضع سياسة متكاملة واستراتيجية خاصة بالعلاقة بين المجتمع المدني والسلطات بما يضمن التعاون وبناء الثقة. لذا يتعين على المؤسسات الوطنية أولاً أن توحد رؤيتها مع المجتمع المدني حول فهم قضايا حقوق الإنسان في البلد والأولويات وأطر العمل وتعريف التحديات والفرص، ثم تشكيل تحالفات على شكل شراكة ومذكرات تفاهم بهدف نشر اتفاقية أو العمل على مواضيع محددة أو إطلاق حملات أو عقد دورات وورش عمل. وهنا أؤكد على دور المؤسسات الوطنية لحقوق الإنسان في دعوة الحكومات إلى إتاحة المزيد من الحيز والمساحة لمنظمات المجتمع المدني والجمعيات الأهلية، وتقديم مقترحات لتعديل القوانين التي تضع قيودا على إنشاء هذه المنظمات وأعمالها، بالإضافة إلى دورها في حماية المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان. ختاما أرجو أن أكون قدمت فكرة واضحة عن تطبيق ودعم المجتمع المدني بصفة عامة وفي الرصد وإعداد التقارير بصفة خاصة، وآمل استمرار هذه الجهود واستمرار تعريفها ونشرها على المستوى الإقليمي والدولي. فالمؤسسات الوطنية تثبت يوما بعد يوم أنها بالفعل تتمتع بموقع فريد بين الحكومة والمجتمع المدني يؤهلها لتحقيق إنجازات مهمة في تعزيز وحماية حقوق الإنسان. شكرا سيادة الرئيس.
شكرا دكتور علي. Thank you very much. Very nice introductions to the discussion. I think we will now have for about 30 minutes. We set out really to look at 3 areas: implementation, coordination, and reporting. And I think with the IPU we were reminded that in the beginning there was little information available for parliaments to be much more involved, but that's changed. They now do have an important role, and I was interested particularly in the area of rallying public opinion, and also in the area of ensuring the budgets are there to be able to implement properly. And the stress that you need to have an effective parliament to be able to do the work. On the national human rights institutions, I think you've heard clearly the varied role of the national human rights institutions, with examples on disappearances from Mexico and Thailand to indigenous populations from Peru to Australia, to the experience in Morocco, particularly rallying Parliament as well as other aspects of society in Morocco. The importance of sometimes having MOUs that can take the work forward. And we heard also from Qatar the importance of working to build capacities on the ground, to work not just with institutions at the UN, but also with civil society and other organizations on the ground in the country. All of that also, people pointed to the challenges, one of them resources. I think we should hear that cry for the need for more resources. The challenges of coordination, the recognition of the roles that these institutions have within their countries. And I also heard several people talk about how we transfer the roles that these institutions are able to play in Geneva to a more effective role in New York, what could be done on that. So without further, people may have some points to add to these. Let's see if we can, maybe I will begin and go around this way. The ambassador of Egypt, I think, was first. Ambassador of Belgium, okay. I was reading my notes, I'm not looking up. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, and thank to Morocco for the hospitality and for taking the initiative of this meeting. And thank you to all the speakers who have contributed to the discussions that we are having today. I must say I like very much the subject. Ambassador Awajar had the expression that we have to leave the Geneva bubble, and I think it's very appropriate. It has to be a constant concern of ours that we do seek real and substantial changes in the way human rights are being respected and implemented in our respective countries. I have a comment and a proposal to make. I mean, the comment is that the mechanism we have here in Geneva, treaty bodies, examinations, and the UPR are very precious and very important mechanism. And I can testify that in my country it has been tremendously efficient. The last UPR examination took place in January. Vice Prime Minister Didier Reynders was there. He invested himself tremendously in this issue, and he discovered, to his dismay, that we still had not ratified the second optional protocol to prevention of torture, and also that we still had not established a national human rights institution in Belgium. The first issue he took to the government right away, and we are looking now at a very quick ratification of this protocol, going over the legalistic objections of some quarters in our government system. And the second issue, the establishment of a national human rights institution, is something that has been discussed between the federal and the regional level in Belgium, and we are confident that we will overcome the discussions and the difficulties about this by the end of the year. So it has had an energizing effect, and I think a very positive effect. It has also led the Vice Prime Minister to make a proposal in Belgium to establish a more rigorous mechanism of implementation of the recommendations coming from the UPR mechanism as well as from the examinations by treaty bodies. He's comparing it to the monitoring by the European Commission on the implementation of budgetary rules in Belgium. You perhaps are familiar with the European semester. Basically, he's taking that comparison to say, well, we need a kind of European semester mechanism to see whether we also in Belgium do implement the recommendations made to us. So a lot of voluntarism and deliberate energy put behind this. We have, and this is alluding to the comparison made by Mr. Hessinger, we have a parliamentary democracy system, which means that the parliament keeps some distance towards the work of the government and doing the monitoring. So the parliament is not involved straight away in any way, but it is the government's responsibility to seize the parliament of the legislation that is needed for implementing the recommendations. Now, the proposal I would like to make. You're all aware that we are approaching the third cycle of the UPR mechanism. The first cycle was basically the first experience, so it was the first occasion when states contributing and participating would formulate recommendations, so the first stage of formulating recommendations. The second cycle, very logically, would then focus on verification to what extent the recommendations had been implemented after the first cycle. Now, the question is, how do we focus, how do we organize this third cycle? And the following idea is coming up in order to increase the efficiency and to avoid repetition. I mean, if we just verify during the third cycle whether the recommendations of the third and second cycle have been implemented, we might fall into repetition. So since we have an occasion to define the focus and maybe establish a few accents, a few priorities for the third cycle, we could, for instance, agree that states taking part in the third cycle would all address the issue of establishment of a national human rights institution. That basically it would be a horizontal recommendations made to all states, and that they would be invited to comment on whether they have established this national human rights institution, how it functions, and whether it conforms to the principles of Paris. I think it would be a useful way to go at the implementation obligations of the states, not only on the substance and the detail of the various aspects of human rights, but basically also focusing on the systems they have in place in their own country with the implementation of human rights. It's a proposal, we have an occasion, and maybe we can discuss this further and try to take it forward. So thank you very much, and I appreciate very much this occasion.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, I'm going to be fair and just go around the table with the four cards, and I'm told Canada and Australia behind me, so we have 6 speakers at the moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. Okay, so please, Ambassador Chauncey, please.
Merci. Tout d'abord, je voudrais remercier la mission permanente du Maroc pour avoir organisé cette importante réunion sur la question de la mise en œuvre des normes internationales en matière des droits de l'homme. Je veux aussi remercier Universal Rights Group qui a bien voulu aussi être comme partenaire dans cet exercice en perspective de la tenue de Glion 3 qui est co-organisée par la mission de la Suisse et de la mission de Norvège. Donc je remercie toutes les parties qui ont initié l'organisation de cette importante réunion sur la question de la mise en œuvre des normes relatives aux droits de l'homme à l'échelle nationale. Puisque le premier thème se rapporte au rôle des parlements et des institutions nationales chargées des droits de l'homme, je vais me focaliser sur l'expérience tunisienne en fait, parce que l'objectif de cette réunion c'est de prendre connaissance des différentes expériences nationales et de voir dans quelle mesure on pourrait tirer profit de chaque expérience en matière de mise en œuvre des normes internationales en matière des droits de l'homme et les incorporer à l'échelle nationale. Et l'intérêt peut-être que pourrait susciter l'expérience tunisienne, c'est que mon pays en fait, a engagé un processus, et ce processus est en fait transitionnel. C'est un processus qui a été engagé il y a à peu près 5 ans et qui continue d'évoluer. Et l'idée principale et l'objectif principal est que la Tunisie a décidé sur la base d'une volonté populaire de s'engager d'une manière déterminée à s'aligner sur les normes internationales en matière des droits de l'homme. Et à cet égard, la première chose à faire, c'est de mettre en œuvre un processus et créer un environnement propice à cet objectif. Et la première chose qui a été faite, c'est de mettre en place ou élaborer une constitution. Donc, je crois qu'une constitution qui comporte les principes qui permettent de préserver les droits de l'homme est une condition nécessaire pour vraiment, par la suite, envisager un mécanisme de mise en œuvre, de suivi et d'établissement de rapports concernant l'engagement de l'État en matière des droits de l'homme. Donc c'est la première chose. Et dans ce cadre, il y a eu un dispositif qui a été mis en place et qui fait que quand on se concentre sur le rôle du Parlement, le Parlement essaye de veiller à la mise en œuvre des différentes conventions, d'abord de ratifier les différentes conventions relatives aux droits de l'homme et de les mettre en œuvre dans le cadre d'une législation nationale. À cet égard, le rôle de la société civile est très important. D'abord, le rôle de la société civile d'une part et le rôle des mécanismes nationaux, des institutions nationales des droits de l'homme, entre autres. Donc je crois que ces deux sortes de mécanismes sont importants pour permettre au Parlement d'avoir la législation qui est nécessaire en la matière. Donc je crois que là, c'est un deuxième aspect important, c'est de s'ouvrir sur l'environnement qui est chargé, qui s'occupe, qui est constitutif qui est constitué des sociétés, des organisations non gouvernementales et des institutions nationales des droits de l'homme. Et à cet égard, je crois qu'il est important de veiller à ce que les institutions nationales des droits de l'homme soient indépendantes dans l'esprit qu'elles soient conformes aux principes de Paris. Et en Tunisie, maintenant, nous avons nous avons engagé un processus qui consiste à mettre en place une instance nationale des droits de l'homme conforme aux principes des droits de l'homme. Et maintenant, nous sommes engagés en collaboration avec le Haut Commissariat des droits de l'homme et les institutions non gouvernementales, les organisations non gouvernementales, en vue de mettre en place cette instance. Donc, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, c'est un processus évolutif et qui est en train de se mettre en place dans la perspective de s'aligner sur les normes et les standards internationaux en matière de mise en œuvre, de suivi et d'établissement des rapports relatifs aux droits de l'homme. Enfin, il y a un aspect que j'aimerais bien mettre en exergue, c'est la question des capacités. Je crois que du fait que c'est une nouvelle expérience pour mon pays, il est nécessaire de veiller à ce que les pays qui veulent mettre en place des institutions ou renforcer leurs mécanismes de mise en œuvre et de suivi et d'établissement des rapports disposent de l'expertise nécessaire à cet effet. Et je crois que ici, pour la Tunisie, nous avons des projets et une coopération importante avec le Haut Commissariat des Nations Unies, avec l'Union européenne et avec d'autres parties internationales, organisations non gouvernementales internationales, pour vraiment trouver le moyen de renforcer les capacités nationales en la matière. Et nous avons tiré beaucoup profit de cette coopération. Bon, la dernière remarque, c'est qu'il est important que les parlements et les institutions nationales, comme l'a dit tout à l'heure l'ambassadeur du Maroc, il est important qu'il y ait une interaction entre le Conseil des droits de l'homme et d'une part les parlements et les institutions nationales chargées des droits de l'homme. Je crois qu'à cet égard, il y a encore des insuffisances et peut-être il faudrait bien penser sur la manière avec laquelle il faut renforcer la coopération entre le Conseil des droits de l'homme, toutes ces activités, les activités qu'il entreprend, ainsi que bien sûr les mécanismes liés aux droits de l'homme en général, entre autres les procédures spéciales, pour vraiment renforcer la mise en œuvre, le suivi et l'établissement des rapports des États en matière des droits de l'homme. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll move on to Ambassador Ethiopia.
Thank you. I'll be extremely brief. In interest of time and also giving into account the desire of colleagues to take part in the session. I'll first of all thank Ambassador Doha for organizing this important policy dialogue, and of course also thank all the presentations, for the very insightful presentation that we have heard this morning. My comment and question is basically on the role of the Parliament in the implementation of the human rights mechanisms. I have heard very carefully the presentation of the Secretary General of IPU. He mentioned one critical area where parliaments are now facing in terms of challenge with the lack of awareness of international human rights mechanism. I fully agree that there is also another area which is critical, especially in developing countries, in particular in Africa, is capacity building. Capacity for the implementation is very critical in terms of training, in terms of resources, and many other factors as well. What I would like to really focus here is we know that parliaments, based on our own national constitutions, they have a role in the implementation of human rights protection and respect. What's more interesting to me to know is, do we have a defined role for the parliament in the implementation of human rights? I don't think so. So I think it would be necessary to have some kind of guidelines for international principles that we should agree first on the international level, cascaded regional and national. So in this respect, probably I would be very happy to know from the Secretary General if there is any interest in terms of developing these guidelines for principle, so that the parliament will benefit. In terms of capacity, probably what will be good, again, I'm focusing on the developing countries, in particular in Africa. If there is some kind of help to set up some kind of a unit, humanitarian unit in the parliament and the secretariat, that will be also very useful. So I'd like to get some insight from the ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very good questions. We'll move on to the Ambassador of India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I saw two more ambassadors raising the, sorry, thank you, Ambassador. Sorry, if you have given me the floor, I might as well take it. First of all, I'd like to thank the Permanent Mission of Morocco for organizing this informal policy dialogue and inviting India, and thank also all the speakers who made the presentation, which is very useful. India's approach in the Human Rights Council has been guided by the firm belief that promotion and protection of human rights can best be pursued through dialogue and cooperation. In this regard, it is important to maintain the intergovernmental character of the Council mechanisms and uphold the primacy of national efforts in the realization of human rights. India has actively participated in various human rights mechanisms, especially in UPR like other countries. We have also interacted with special procedure mandate holders to whom we have extended a standing invitation since 2011, and 10 of these mandate holders have visited India. In fact, the special rapporteur on adequate housing is currently on a visit to India. We have also consistently interacted with various treaty bodies. Coming to the topic of today's discussion, I would like to say that the issue of implementation, coordination and reporting related to the recommendations emanating from various human rights mechanisms has to be state-specific, and there was no specific need for any external monitoring apart from those which have already been agreed by the UN member states under various human rights related provisions. We believe that the extent of a state's seriousness towards recommendations received from UN human rights mechanism is reflected in domestic legislation. Moreover, in any parliamentary democracy like ours, it is one of the fundamental responsibilities of Parliament to hold the executives publicly accountable. Hence, we do not see any special separate role for parliaments as yet in either implementation or in overseeing implementation of this recommendation. I'll give you a concrete example. For example, in our system, the ratification of treaties is not done by Parliament. It is done by the Cabinet of the day headed by the Prime Minister. And I've also seen in the IPU last year when our delegation participated, and we participated actively, and the Honorable MPs and the Speaker are well aware of the importance of the human rights mechanisms. So this brings me to the second point, which is in our experience there cannot be an exclusive template outlining the engagement and involvement of parliamentarians, judges, lawyers, NHRIs, and other civil society actors as far as the national implementation, coordination, and reporting structures are concerned. These have to be nationally evolved and be suitably aligned with the existing national structure. In this regard, any external tampering or imposition could prove to be counterproductive. Also, it may not be very helpful to have multiple channels of monitoring, reporting of the implementation. It is quite possible to have a uniform and robust monitoring reporting mechanism with sufficient opportunities for civil society participation. Similarly, NHRIs already have a prescribed role in monitoring and reporting on implementation. They should be respected, especially in cases such as India, where the National Human Rights Council is a body created by an act of Parliament and is required to be headed by no less than the retired Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. In fact, they had just listed last month when there was a meeting of all the NHRIs here in Geneva. Stop here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Hopefully the distinguished ambassador of Egypt will forgive me having gone to him first. I then went down the table, but now is the opportunity to jump in. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be careful next time. I'm trying to be giving gesture to Bertrand. I might go all the way down. But let me first thank the URG and the mission of Morocco and Ambassador Jar for hosting us today, and especially in this beautiful room. I feel that I'm in Marrakesh. I would like to raise a very few points because I know we don't have much time today, especially with the coming panelists and the number of speakers. First, the title of this session is Implementation, Monitoring, and Reporting. If you go to the two specific issues that we listened to panelists on, had to do with implementation and reporting. There is no monitoring involved there. I think the issue of the Parliament, let me address the issue of the Parliament first, is a very critical one, and we need to be very open about it. Governments of the executive branch are subject to Parliament. That's at the national level. we are at the international level trying to do the other way around, is that we in the, as governments, we're going to agree on norms on human rights, then ask the parliaments only to implement them and report to us on the implementation of them. I think there is something wrong in that annex. And this is not confined to human rights. This issue has been with the UN throughout all these major conferences, environment, population, women, and henceforth. The role of parliaments is really not defined in how the UN, which is a body of government, what is the role of parliaments in influencing the decision-making process that we have. And I'm afraid that it's maybe close to zero. And it is left to each government to try to influence the decision-making process to the extent that it feels it will garner the support of its own parliament when the specific agreement or treaty is put for the consideration of that particular government, that particular parliament. And I will leave this point there for the moment, but I think it would require further reflection maybe in another opportunity. On the role of IPU, I think and I listen very carefully to IPU. I think IPU has a lot to do in terms of training for the parliamentarians, especially new parliaments and new parliamentarians. For example, we in Egypt, we had a new parliament that was elected and started operation late last year, early this year. And most of those MPs in the parliament are new and young as well. And I think that they will start considering a lot of legislations related to human rights, investment, economics, and so on. And I don't think that they have enough expertise, to be honest, to look at all these issues. So training is very important. And I don't think that IPU has enough expertise to do that. So they would have to solicit support from other UN bodies, especially in Geneva, including the Office of the High Commissioner, in order to develop programs, training programs that would meet that kind of requirement. And that will lead us to the flexibility sometimes we feel in the advocating certain norms, that there are different interpretations to certain aspects that are not shared by the members of the international community. Or let's put it this way, they are not shared by all members of the Council of Human Rights. But unfortunately, sometimes we find different forces trying to push to one direction over the other. And that has to be avoided completely in any technical assistance exercise. As for the role of the national human rights institutions, I think it's not there yet. We do have special segments for them during the Human Rights Council, that's true. That's probably on the margin, but we don't see them in the meetings. We don't listen to them as we used to do, maybe at the UPR level more specifically. And I agree with my colleague, Ambassador of Belgium, on the need to have these kind of institutions in most countries, in every country. I know that some countries don't have them yet, and they are trying to do so. We have submitted recommendations during UPR of a number of countries in order to facilitate or to urge them to do so. I think one of the missing elements might be the role of the national implementing mechanisms in all of that. But we have a specific session for that which follows, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ambassador of Pakistan.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank His Excellency the Ambassador of Morocco for hosting us here in this beautiful room, and a big compliments to Morocco for this absolutely exquisite place and our opportunity to be here. I'd also like to thank the Universal Rights Group for the efforts they undertake in this context. Quickly, I think we've already surpassed our time limit for the first segment, so we need to be really fast on this. On national institutions that help in the implementation of recommendations coming from UPR, number one, UPR has been a success of the Human Rights Council, and I think we need to keep on underscoring that as a fact. As far as our UPR is concerned, we've already submitted we are going to go into the third cycle, we've done 2 complete cycles. And I can tell you from our national experience in doing the UPR that it has been a very productive one. It's based on consultations with the civil society, with consultations with members of the parliament and other important stakeholders as well. We've taken our recommendations of the UPR back to the country and have been able to bring to the government has been able to look at where the laws are required and where amendments are required. So there has been an input from our UPR process which has been extremely helpful. We have a National Human Rights Institution as well. The National Human Rights Institution has been appointed by the Parliament. It is a statutory body, and it is completely answerable to the Parliament and not to the government. So if the government can be reviewed, government actions can be reviewed in this regard. As far as we have within our constitution, we are amongst the early ones who had in our constitution a complete detailed listing of human rights that is incumbent upon the executive, the legislature, and all parts of the government to ensure and assure to the people. And of course, flowing from it is, as has been discussed, the role of the Parliament. We have a Human Rights Committee in the Parliament which looks at human rights issues. It was also responsible for the appointment of the members of the NHRI. And this committee has been playing an important role in filtering looking at legislation with regard to human rights in Pakistan. So basically, there are a number of sort of linkages and frameworks that are available. The Constitution has it that there's a clear role for the Parliament that is there, and then there's legislation that brings forth that tries to implement the recommendations of the UPR as far as possible. We believe that the UPR has been successful, it should continue to be the same, and has much potential. I'll stop here and then take on the next round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for also being brief. I know the time is moving. We have Canada, Australia, Jordan, and Albania. Okay, please. I didn't see Canada. Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci au Maroc, évidemment à URG pour nous accueillir ici aujourd'hui dans cette conversation importante. Mes commentaires seront brefs, puisque je voudrais simplement parler un petit peu du modèle canadien qui diffère de certaines façons. Effectivement, il n'y a pas de modèle unique. Les exemples qu'on a entendus jusqu'à maintenant l'indiquent clairement. Peut-être souligner une ou deux particularités. D'abord, dans un premier temps, évidemment, les institutions nationales, comme en l'occurrence le Canada, la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne, et dans un second temps, les institutions parlementaires. Pour notre part, nous avons plusieurs comités conjoints au Parlement, dont un qui est uniquement consacré aux droits de la personne, sont des piliers essentiels de notre mise en œuvre. Par contre, le Canada constitue une fédération, ce qui signifie donc que le gouvernement fédéral n'est pas le seul à avoir à la mise en œuvre, mais doit effectivement partager cette responsabilité avec les provinces, responsabilités qui sont par ailleurs enchâssées dans la Constitution canadienne. Donc, c'est important, c'est à la fois un outil et un défi. Un défi donc qui repose sur la coordination, c'est-à-dire que les provinces et le gouvernement fédéral doivent travailler de concert au quotidien pour mettre en œuvre ces obligations. Et donc la collaboration, elle est forcée. Et ceci dit, que ce soit l'examen périodique universel ou l'engagement du Canada dans les différents traités, ce sont des effets de levier qui permettent à garder cette collaboration toujours bien en tête. Alors, on sait que c'est la même chose pour tout le monde, et c'est la raison sans doute pour laquelle tous nous sommes attachés à ces mécanismes. Nous voulons qu'ils vivent et demeurent en santé. Évidemment, je ne voudrais pas conclure mes remarques sans parler de la Commission canadienne des droits de la personne, parce que cette commission, elle se distingue d'abord par son indépendance. Un de ses rôles principaux est celui de recevoir les plaintes, autant de citoyens que de groupes, au sujet de manquements, quels qu'ils soient, y compris des gouvernements provinciaux ou fédéraux. Et ce qui signifie donc qu'à cause de cette indépendance-là, elle est en mesure de faire des représentations à la Cour, y compris à la Cour suprême, le cas échéant. Et cette indépendance-là est un outil très, très important de la performance canadienne. Soit dit en passant, la Commission canadienne des droits de l'homme reçoit les demandes d'aide technique que certains partenaires peuvent fournir. Je suis sûre que d'autres commissions nationales à travers le monde offrent ce genre de soutien-là. Un soutien qui n'est pas uniquement dans la compréhension des obligations, mais évidemment dans la mise en œuvre, le sujet qui nous préoccupe aujourd'hui. Alors, je voulais simplement dire que le Canada bénéficie de ces outils, puisque ce sont des outils fédérateurs qui nous forcent à garder l'œil toujours sur les obligations, et que même si le Canada constitue une fédération et que les responsabilités sont partagées à divers niveaux, ce n'est pas une entrave, mais en effet un outil de mise en œuvre. Merci.
Thank you very much. Australia. Jordan, please, okay, Jordan.
Shukran, thank you very much. And thank you very much for Ambassador of Morocco, the Moroccan mission, as well as the URG, for hosting this important meeting. And thank you for allowing me to also share my views on this very important subject. So, what do we do at the national levels, on the national level, to move the issue from that of ratification and presenting of reports to the different treaty bodies towards more implementation and ensuring that we do implement, and who are the stakeholders in this national effort that will move us towards this. I would like to share a few points on our own national mechanisms that exist in Jordan. It is not a new issue for us, but it is a continuously evolving process, ensuring that we implement our obligations and commitments, and those stem first and foremost from the Constitution, and secondly, of course, from our commitments to the different human rights instruments and other related instruments and other organizations at the UN. And what we have done is, as early as, of course, we continue to present our reports to treaty bodies, but what we have done is we have ensured that there were mechanisms to oversee our implementation at the national level and to hold the executive accountable. And as early as 2006, we established a human rights institution, the National Human Rights Center, and according to the principles of Paris Principles, and this center presents an annual report that to His Majesty the King, to the Prime Minister, and the government is instructed to reply to this report, and it is the Minister of Justice who oversees the reply of the report. But there are other institutions also that oversee the different implementation of other UN instruments. We have the Jordanian National Commission for Women, which oversees gender issues and pushes towards women equality and equity at the national level. We also have the Higher Council for Disability, which oversees the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Disabled persons with disabilities. All of these are established by law and are independent institutions. They do not answer to the government. In fact, it is the government that has to answer to them. And they also act as umbrellas to other civil society. And so therefore the stakeholders are, of course, civil society, the independent institutions, as well as the government, the executive. And the government has instituted a national committee for human rights, as well as appointed a national coordinator linked directly to the Prime Minister that also presents its report on these issues. It is important that the obligations are taken on board. And the national strategies, all of them, have a human rights component. And most recently, we also issued a national strategy for human rights for the year 2016 to 2025. That we have invited civil society, human rights activists that participated in this, in the preparation of the strategy, but we have invited civil society and organizations who are interested in the follow-up of the implementation of this to indeed be partners with the government on this regard. So what is important is A, you have the political will to go ahead and do this, you have your commitments at the UN, at the international level, but B, you need to empower the different agencies and mechanisms to do their work at the national level. And on Parliament and your different strategies, whether it's for the elderly or for women or for violence against women or for human rights, all have to mainstream human rights issues or gender-related issues in them. And with respect to Parliament, may I salute the IPU because delegations that do not have women in their makeup lose votes when it comes to voting, and this is very important. And I say this indeed it is very important to somehow sensitize Parliament and engage them in the human rights process. But sometimes doing so, not all parliaments are progressive, and therefore we should find ways to synthesize them to human rights issues at the national level. Unfortunately, women groups in Jordan were pushing for a 17% quota, and we're not able to get it because Parliament saw that women didn't need 17%. So there's a long way to go before we can count on Parliament fully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, and for reminding us also of the role of women who trump many of these mechanisms and institutions. It's good that people have also brought in the fact that it's not just the institutions we're discussing today, there are others on the ground playing an important role, and of course constitutions have come up a couple of times, and all of it, I think, the Ambassador also mentioned national strategies. They become key to how those strategies bring in everybody on the ground. Australia, I think, will be the last, unless Ambassador Albania, would you like to have a crack? Please, yeah, go ahead. Good.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Ambassador, for having us today to continue the discussion that we had last year. I would like just to mention a few issues regarding the Parliament. in functional democracies, the division of power is the first rule. So we know that the parliament and the government has their own rules. But the parliament can be effective in monitoring the activity of the government, because it is the political forum where the position and the opposition are together and they listen what other institutions present to the parliament. This is one very important role of the government. The other one is, at least in Albania, there are several independent institutions depending directly from the parliament. So, and one of them is the National Human Rights Institution that we call in Albania Ombudsman. For parliaments to have and do their role properly are needed not only strong and effective parliamentarians, but are needed some structures within the parliament, like the secretariats of the parliament, because the parliamentarians, at least in my country, they come and go. Some of them stay for 4 years or 5 years, the others longer, but the parliaments move, the parliamentarians, and the structures should remain. So here I see the role of the IPU, since there is a place where 170 parliaments are together, might provide some guidelines or some examples on how to create some sustained structures within the parliament in order to continue with the work that began from their predecessors. We listen here that many parliamentarians, and this is true, do not know the human rights mechanism, what we can say for the societies. So I see that the parliament might have their own role in inciting the government to introduce the teaching of human rights into schools, for example, because the education is a very important role for any society. And to come to the human rights institutions, or ombudsman as we call it in Albania, also here the parliament has a role, because not only decides the structure, but also decides on the budgeting of this institution, and it monitors the activity of the ombudsman, because the ombudsman has the obligation to report to the parliament once a year. So again, the parliament has a distinct role in the life of the independent institutions and also to the ombudsman. In Albania, we do have a young democracy and new institutions. So we have an ombudsman, and we also have a commissioner against discrimination. So this means that it is almost the same function, but the two institutions has different roles and capacities, because the Commissioner Against Discrimination has a stronger role. It has the role also to investigate and to provide also sanctions on the breaching of the rules that he might notify in the daily life of the institutions. So we have yet to learn from each other and also to improve the activity of our own institutions. I would like to stress that it is a very good idea what the Ambassador of Belgium said, that the UPR, it is a very good instrument, and we need to think further on the role of this mechanism, on how to strengthen it more. And it is good also to look at although the states might have different structures, but to look at the mechanisms of the human rights in each and every country. I would like also to add that maybe it would be good also to look at the setting some priorities for the countries that are under review, because hundreds of recommendations are very hard to follow and to find out how all these recommendations have been implemented. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Australia, I think, was the last speaker.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the floor as the last speaker. Thank you to URG. I'm pressing it. Is there anything else I need to do? Try again. Speak now. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to take more time, but I wanted to thank URG on Morocco and also for acknowledging Australia's leadership in running the resolution in the Council on NHRI. So this is certainly an issue that is very important to us nationally. I'd like to offer two very brief examples of concrete ways in which Australia has sought to advance engagement with Parliament and NHRIs in implementing human rights recommendations, and to make two brief comments on the discussion we've had so far. In terms of what we have done last year, we underwent UPR and we made a voluntary pledge to establish a UPR monitoring mechanism, which we are doing with our National Human Rights Institution. So the government and our National Human Rights Institution are working together to develop a monitoring process, which will likely be a web-based monitoring mechanism, and there will be periodic opportunities for the government to provide statements on progress. So I thought that may be of interest to others around the table. We also took the very simple step of having two parliamentarians on our UPR delegation, an opposition and government representative, all recognising the fundamental oversight role of the Parliament in our democracy. Our Parliament has a joint parliamentary committee which ensures that every bill going through the Australian Parliament is subject to scrutiny as to whether it is compatible with our international human rights obligations. So that I offer by way of sharing national experience. In terms of the discussion so far, I would also offer support for Belgium's suggestion that we take forward recommendations to establish NHRIs through the UPR process. I also was very interested in the discussion raised both by the IPU and by others around the table about the need to look at participation of NHRIs and parliaments here in the Council, in Geneva, in New York, but also I think there was a topic raised around the treaty bodies, and I think this might be an area for more discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador Sadeghi.
Thank you, sir. Sorry to ask for very late, but few words I thought I should share also. Let me start by thanking Moroccan ambassadors and the universal rights groups and yourself, Dr. I think it's very useful and it's very important to share experiences and of countries on this level. In my country, Saudi Arabia, as you know, is being part of this process of the Human Rights Council. We are now members for the third time, and we will go hopefully for a fourth time. We have several levels, in fact, in our country. We have a national human rights committee, which we are preparing it hopefully to be a full member as Paris member. We have also a commission which is headed by a minister and report directly to the king on the human rights. But I think the other important issue is on our Shura Council we have a special committee. In fact, we have 14 committees, but there is a committee called Committee on Human Rights and Control Commission. And there are 9 members of our Shura Council. And this committee is headed by a lady called Dr. Throya Obaid, and as you were, Dr. Throya Obaid used to be Under Secretary of United Nations for a long time, taking care of the development issues. And again, 5 members of this committee are also women. So I think that shows how important human rights issues is for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has also joined the 7 conventions and agreements out of 9 on human rights. We have finished our second UPR already. We are preparing ourselves for our CAT report, I think next week, and also we're preparing our report on the agreement on child rights. So I do believe that there is an important role for parliaments. But of course, I do agree with our Indian remarks that the whole process should be inside the country. We should not really try to bring something from the outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I know time is moving, but I'm always eternally optimistic that we'll catch up in the next session, as a lot of the points have been made. I think there is no break, so we will be going straight into now the next session. I'm very happy to be handing over to my former colleague at OHR, Paolo David, who is the Chief Capacity Building and Harmonization Section, Human Rights Treaties Division at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And now we're moving into the area of the evolution of national implementation and coordination and reporting structures, and then we'll look at civil society. Paolo.
Thank you, Hani, and I would like to join the previous speakers in warmly thanking the Permanent Mission in Morocco.
And the third element is that such a mechanism should have dedicated and continuous staff, building expertise, knowledge and professionalism at the country level. Now, not all countries have added resources. They have more reorganized differently their resources. The national mechanism for reporting and follow-up is a governance tool. It's a different way to deal with human rights implementation. So, a number of governments have moved resources to task staff in different ministries to work together, and not necessarily added new staff and therefore new resources. The fourth conditions that we have identified is in fact broken into 4 sub-conditions, and I will quickly go over them. The first one is an engagement capacity, which means that the national mechanism should obviously have the capacity and also the authority to convene all actors for reporting, for follow-up, implementation and monitoring. The second is a coordination capacity, coordination with different state actors, such as parliaments, judiciary, and National Statistics Office, for example. And again, while respecting separation of powers, obviously. The third element is a consultation capacity, which mainly is the engagement with with independent actors, national human rights institutions and civil society actors. And the fourth capacity is the knowledge management capacity, which is very important, and where we have seen, again, I repeat, states putting in place tracking systems to track the implementation of recommendations. They have clustered their recommendations, they have created databases for reporting or follow-up, and established follow-up plans of actions with timelines and lead ministries. In conclusion, well, it's not really a conclusion, but just to close and not to make it too long, I will rebound on the interesting 2 comments that Ambassador of Morocco has made this morning concerning the possible future of the establishment of a network of such national mechanism. The added value could be to look at, of course, different practices and share information beyond our study. We think our study is just a first phase of knowledge sharing, but we could go beyond that. And the second element that was raised this morning, but that could be more midterm objective, because these are the early days, maybe of national mechanisms, to see if there could be some joint principles of efficiency that bring together such national mechanism, such as, of course, the Paris principles for national human rights institutions. And the last word is to highlight that the General Assembly in this resolution 68268 has given some resources to the Office of the High Commissioner to support states in establishing or reinforcing the national mechanism. So we are working on these issues in a number of countries, and there's great interest and demand, I must say. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paolo, and for putting it briefly. I know time is short and we would have loved to have had more time, but I think, again, for the sake of getting all the issues out there and to get a bit deeper into the experiences now, we're going to look at 3 case studies: Paraguay, Morocco, and Georgia. Hopefully everyone is here. We'll start with Paraguay, with His Excellency Juan Guillermo Martinez, the permanent trustee.
Thank you, Chairperson. At the outset, I'd like to thank the Ambassador of Morocco and the Universal Rights Group for organizing this meeting and for the invitation to speak about CIMORE, which is the national follow-up system in Paraguay. Ambassador Aguirre sends his regards and apologizes for not being able to attend this meeting. Now I'd like to talk to you about CIMORE, like I said, Paraguay's national follow-up system. Its history started 5 years ago, in 2011, when the government of Paraguay, in cooperation with OHCHR, set up a search engine that now contains a list of all recommendations made to the country by human rights treaty bodies. Those are the UN treaty bodies, special procedures, the UPR mechanisms, and even rulings from the Inter-American Human Rights Courts. This collection of data was done mainly through the Human Rights Network that is composed by institutions from all 3 branches of power. Since human rights is a cross-cutting issue, the information needed was scattered in the archives of all of these institutions. And in that sense, interinstitutional cooperation was essential. Once we have, that was the first stage in the history of CIMORE. Once we have in place all this information that is publicly available on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Paraguay, the next logical step was to say, well, we have this information, what do we do with it? And we immediately started off helping we realized that we had tools that could help us to follow up, to make sure that we're implementing and we're following up on the recommendations made by these treaty bodies. And in that sense, CIMORE has really helped to several institutions to have a human rights-based approach when formulating and implementing national plans, and has really shaped, has really influenced, for example, the Human Rights National Plan that was launched in 2013, and the National Plan for Persons with Disabilities that was launched last year. And so in that sense, with that second added element to CIMORE, we have now a tool that contains up-to-date information on the status of the implementation of these recommendations. This new component, as I said, was officially released in Asunción in June of 2014, almost 2 years ago. So how do we keep Simori up and running? And we do it through the cooperation and exchange of information of 51 institutions across the whole spectrum of the government. The executive branch, the legislative branch, parliament, and the judicial branch. There are working groups and focal points that work on specific issues like poverty, children and youth, women issues, indigenous, Afro-descendants and migrants, elder persons and people with disabilities, LGBTI issues, among others. Of course, in this process, consultations with civil society are a key component, and includes training workshops for people who deal directly with the collection and the collection and implementation of these recommendations. So, to sum up, given the short time that we have available, I'd like to say that the main achievements that Simori has helped us are to help us strengthen a human rights-based approach in the formulation and implementation of annual working plans, like I mentioned before. I won't repeat those now. And it also has helped us increase the level of transparency of the government and the accountability as well. We have shared these experiences with several countries within our region and outside the region, and we're glad to keep doing that. And the office, we understand the Office of the High Commission is now implementing the index, a universal index of human rights based on the work done through Simori. And that's being translated into several languages around the world. And with that, I'd like to conclude my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for also being very brief. I know when I was at OHR, we were all very jealous of Simori and wondering when it could be spread across all the other regions. So perhaps after this discussion, there'll be more collaborations, and you never know. We'll move on to Morocco with Mr. Abdelaziz Karraki, Director of Coordination and Promotion of Human Rights of the Interministerial Delegation. Thank you.
Merci. Mesdames, Messieurs les ambassadeurs, Mesdames, Messieurs, je voudrais tout d'abord remercier notre ambassadeur pour cette invitation qui va nous permettre de partager l'expérience de la délégation interministérielle aux droits de l'homme. La pratique conventionnelle des États a démontré à travers le temps qu'il ne suffit pas de ratifier les instruments internationaux des droits de l'homme et de soumettre des rapports pour apprécier le degré d'engagement des États en matière de droits de l'homme. Car encore faut-il que les conditions de mise en œuvre effective des engagements de l'État soient préalablement réunies. Il ne suffit pas d'émettre des invitations permanentes à l'intention des procédures spéciales pour permettre une véritable interaction et la mise en place d'un véritable suivi de la situation des droits. Ce qui importe fondamentalement, c'est de réunir au regard de chaque visite convenue les conditions préalables d'un engagement continu concernant la visite en elle-même et aussi et surtout au titre de son suivi. C'est la raison pour laquelle la délégation interministérielle aux droits de l'homme a choisi une approche basée sur la planification stratégique. En étroite coordination avec tous les départements ministériels et institutions nationales concernées, la délégation a procédé à l'élaboration d'un plan d'action national de façon à permettre une mise en œuvre rationnelle, cohérente et globale de l'ensemble des recommandations issues du système onusien, lesquelles s'inscrivent pour la très grande majorité dans le cadre des réformes structurantes lancées depuis plusieurs années. L'élaboration du projet de plan d'action a connu plusieurs étapes cruciales dans la perspective de son adoption finale et consensuelle par toutes les parties prenantes. Le plan est fondé sur l'identification d'axes principaux parmi ces recommandations, subdivisées en sous-axes et mettant en évidence l'objet de la recommandation, son état actuel, les mesures et les procédures de sa mise en œuvre, l'organisme gouvernemental concerné, les indicateurs de suivi, les délais de mise en œuvre. 9 grands axes ont été identifiés qui renvoient à une série de thématiques regroupant les recommandations. La promotion, le développement démocratique, la primauté du droit, l'interaction avec le système onusien des droits de l'homme, la promotion et la protection des droits de l'homme, la promotion des droits économiques, sociaux, culturels et environnementaux, la protection de la promotion des droits civils et politiques, la promotion et la protection des droits catégoriels, la promotion de la culture des droits de l'homme par l'éducation et la formation, la promotion du cadre institutionnel pour la protection et la promotion des droits de l'homme, et enfin des recommandations d'ordre général. La délégation interministérielle aux droits de l'homme a mis en place un système de suivi de la mise en œuvre des recommandations du mécanisme onusien des droits de l'homme, qui est un outil de travail à l'intention de ces cadres et responsables des points focaux des départements ministériels, des institutions nationales et des autres parties impliquées dans la mise en œuvre des dites recommandations. La mise en place du dit système de suivi et de son guide d'utilisation s'inscrit dans le cadre de l'exercice de la DIDH de 2 de ses missions principales, à savoir l'élaboration des rapports périodiques à soumettre aux organes de traité sur la mise en œuvre des conventions internationales des droits de l'homme et l'appui à l'intégration des droits de l'homme dans les politiques publiques. Le suivi de mise en œuvre des recommandations revêt une importance capitale pour l'ensemble des acteurs, départements publics, ONG, Parlement, institutions nationales. Pour le pouvoir exécutif, cette importance est cruciale, d'autant plus que le Maroc a fait de la promotion et la protection des droits de l'homme un des piliers d'une société basée sur le choix démocratique, la garantie des droits et libertés traduit l'inscription et la participation active et accrue du Maroc dans les efforts déployés par la communauté internationale à travers ces instances compétentes dans la promotion des normes et mécanismes, à même de contribuer à l'amélioration de la condition humaine et asseoir son développement en tant que condition nécessaire à la paix et à la sécurité dans le monde. Les recommandations des mécanismes onusiens des droits de l'homme adressées au Maroc suite à l'examen des rapports périodiques par le comité onusien compétent ou celles issues du mécanisme de l'examen périodique universel ou adressées par les experts indépendants au groupe de travail qui visite le Maroc dans le cadre des procédures spéciales du Conseil des droits de l'homme, portent le regard des experts onusiens sur la mise en œuvre effective des engagements du Maroc. À ce titre, les lois, stratégies et programmes publics sont passés en revue et analysés et un regard est porté sur l'action publique par rapport et son étendue sur l'effectivité des droits de l'homme. Aussi, le suivi rigoureux de la mise en œuvre des dites recommandations constitue une occasion pour l'ensemble des acteurs, en premier lieu les départements ministériels, pour renforcer leur cadre juridique et institutionnel et mettre en place ou redresser leur stratégie afin de promouvoir et mieux protéger les droits de l'homme et donner ainsi un sens aux engagements souscrits au titre des différents instruments internationaux. Par ailleurs, le dit suivi est appelé à s'inscrire dans le processus même de la planification des différentes politiques publiques à travers la prise de considération des engagements internationaux en matière de droits de l'homme. Permettez-moi de rappeler que la délégation interministérielle des droits de l'homme est investie d'une mission globale de renforcement de l'interaction du Maroc avec le système onusien des droits de l'homme. À ce titre, elle est chargée, entre autres, d'élaborer en concertation avec toutes les parties prenantes les rapports à soumettre aux organes de traité et de coordonner le processus de leur examen avec les comités conventionnels concernés, de veiller et suivre de la mise en œuvre par toutes les parties prenantes, notamment les départements ministériels et institutions nationales, des recommandations issues des 3 mécanismes onusiens des droits précités, d'accompagner et d'appuyer les départements ministériels et institutions nationales pour l'intégration des droits de l'homme, conformément aux engagements internationaux souscrits et ceux dans leurs lois stratégiques et politiques. Dans ce cadre, la prise en considération des engagements internationaux dans le processus de planification des différentes politiques publiques, de la mise en œuvre ainsi que leur suivi et évaluation est une finalité et un gage pour l'effectivité des droits de l'homme. Aussi, et eu égard à la multiplicité des engagements et des recommandations des mécanismes onusiens des droits de l'homme, à leur interdépendance et à leur caractère transversal, la mise en place d'outils et de structures et mécanismes de coordination assortis de programmes ciblés de renforcement de capacités des ressources humaines en charge des dossiers de planification, des affaires juridiques et suivi et évaluation au niveau central et régional s'avère indispensable pour réaliser le but ultime de tout engagement en matière des droits de l'homme. À ce titre, la DIDH a mis en place un système d'information qui est en phase bien sûr d'essai et qui va permettre le recueil, le traitement et le partage de l'information relative au suivi de la mise en œuvre des engagements en matière des droits de l'homme. À terme, il facilitera le processus de préparation des rapports périodiques à soumettre aux organes de traité et constituera sans doute une plateforme pour les utilisateurs, les appuyant dans le processus d'appropriation. Il constitue aussi une réponse aux directives onusiennes relatives à la diffusion des différents rapports et observations des comités conventionnels. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we will jump straight into the last presentation with my good friend Peter Splinter, who probably needs no introduction around the room. Now an independent. Sorry, Georgia. Oh my God! It shows that I'm so much into the subject matter. So Georgia is the third example before we get to Peter. And it will be His Excellency Mr. Shalva Shishkarushvili. Sorry for massacring the name and pronunciation, but please go ahead.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to join previous speakers in expressing our gratitude to Morocco, Ambassador of Morocco and URG for organizing today's event and selecting Georgia to provide a case study on that. So I will gladly share with you the information on our own national, on our own Human Rights Council, which is basically a fundamental and principal body for monitoring and coordinating the implementation of the action plans. Before going to that point, just a very brief background information that only 2 years ago the Parliament actually adopted the Human Rights Strategy, which is basically the first ever policy paper by Georgia, and it was followed by the approval of the action plans by the government. So the action plan is covering 2 years period. The first one was covering 2014 and 15, and it lists goals, objectives, activities, responsible bodies, time frames, and indicators for the implementation. The plan is a living document, if I may say so, and it may be amended whenever the necessity pops up. In order to ensure the full implementation of these documents, the Interagency Human Rights Council was established, which is a permanent body and is chaired by the Prime Minister, and all cabinet ministers are in the council, and the council actually engages with all relevant actors such as judiciary, parliament, NGOs, international organizations, or Georgia's international partners as well. While establishing the council, we've tried to take on board all the recommendations existing on the best practices and provided by the Office of the High Commissioner, such as for example, the all-inclusive character of the body, permanent nature of the council, the high-level representation, and other elements as well. So it has two basically levels of engagement, which is the plenary, obviously chaired by the Prime Minister, and then the working groups, which we have actually few thematic working groups. Pending the formal establishment of these groups, at this point, the working groups have been conducting their work in an ad hoc regime, and we think that it should be represented at either deputy ministers level or at the directors level in the future. The work of the council is being supported by the secretariat, given into consideration the amount of the work the council has. The team is relatively small, only 5 people. Well, the fund is obviously provided by the state budget. In addition to the assisting of the council in organizing the meetings, it has some additional also collateral functions as well. In some cases, certain some governmental agencies would approach the secretariat in order to make sure that certain legislative amendments are in line with the action plan or Georgia's international obligations. So obviously the council interacts and it has a platform of permanent interaction with the NGOs, and they are attending both plenary sessions or the working group level as well, and the NGOs as a good platform for the engagement, the exchange of views with the government, and I think the government would only welcome any further continuation of that role. In that context, I think the NGOs' potential reporting as a parallel tool would be also welcomed by the government, whether it is individual, thematic, or joint reports on the status of the implementation of the commitment and the action plan. So one example of good collaboration with the NGOs is the recent elaboration of the action plan for the years 2016 and 17, which is basically finalized at this point. So there were a number of separate meetings with the engagement of all stakeholders I've mentioned in the beginning of my interventions, and I must say that the majority of the recommendations which have been suggested by the NGOs are supported by the government, and that is already incorporated in the action plan. So I think that's a good illustration that it's not just a formal setup of engagement with NGOs, and it's not just courtesy offered to NGOs to be represented at the meetings. Also one important element I want to highlight, that during the last UPR consideration, and we had our second cycle last November, we pledged that, so we committed that the UPR recommendations would be incorporated in our action plan, and that's what we are going at this point. It is being clusterized, if I may say so, and it would end up in the action plan. At this point, that is still draft, but the majority of the work has been already concluded. Obviously, the council interacts with the parliament, and there is a permanent, traditional reporting on annual basis on the work of the council to the parliament, and the government representatives are coming to the parliament, and they are engaged in the consideration of the report with the members of the parliament, and in the framework of the Human Rights Committee's framework. So that body is relatively new, and obviously there have been a number of challenges, problems we've identified together with other players and actors. So, and I think this is the right time in order to step into and to make necessary improvements in the work of the council and the whole structure. There have been a number of steps identified already by the government, and there are consideration of several steps which may include, for example, the more precise definition of the rules of procedures and the structure itself of the council, working groups, and the secretariat itself. Maybe that was also a kind of a problem preventing us to formalize the setup of the working group as well, which we are going to, which the government is going to implement. Also, it is important to make a certain hierarchy of the different policy papers, which is in Georgia. That is not only action plan, but the separate also action plans run by the ministries, and are also important to somehow avoid overlapping and duplication in this context. So one important element is to help the secretariat to be to be fully operational. In that context, the government is going to strengthen that five people body in order to better fulfill the functions. Maybe two very quick points also related to the future steps in the context of improving the work of the council. That is, we are considering to discuss the periodicity of the action plans. Currently that covers 2 years period. There are a number of suggestions on 4 years, 3 years, somehow to coincide maybe with the UPR cycle as well, but all the election time frame. So that there are a number of proposals, and we are considering one. And also a quick point on the launching of the web page in order to have a better, let's say, in order to achieve more inclusive and transparency setup. We are going to launch a web page, and in this context, I must say that we follow very carefully the case our distinguished member of the Paraguayan mission has outlined. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for also making it as brief as possible. It shows I'm not such a great chair, but we'll carry on. So Peter, I introduced you a little bit before, formerly Amnesty International coordinator here in Geneva, but now an independent human rights expert. Please, Peter. On the mobilizing and empowering domestic civil society and encouraging their roles on the ground.
Thank you, Hani. I'd like to join others in thanking the Ambassador and Permanent Mission of Morocco and the Universal Rights Group for hosting this timely and important discussion. I'll try to abbreviate my comments. So let me start by stating the obvious. It's sometimes forgotten or overlooked, and that's the implementation of human rights standards and related recommendations is something that takes place at the domestic level in countries around the world. The UN and regional human rights political bodies and expert mechanisms serve as catalysts for national action. Among the principal catalytic functions they play, the international bodies and mechanisms identify and give profile to issues. They generate political pressure to address those issues, and they propose ways of addressing them, including through support for technical cooperation. Civil society actors play an important role in nourishing the international human rights political bodies and expert mechanisms in their catalytic function. Civil society actors provide important information and analysis about human rights situations in countries around the world to the various bodies and mechanisms. They often provide information and analysis about implementation, and not often enough, but regularly, the lack of implementation of decisions and recommendations of the human rights, political and expert mechanisms. civil society actors contribute to generating political pressure for the implementation of human rights. They regularly provide their own recommendations for better implementing human rights. To make the most effective use of international mechanisms as catalysts for domestic improvements, civil society advocacy should envisage cycles of improvement in which success and shortcomings in the implementation of decisions and recommendations of the international bodies and mechanisms inform further international advocacy that builds on what has already been done. But at the end of the day, as Eleanor Roosevelt observed in 1948, if human rights are to have any meaning, they must have that meaning close to home. I'd suggest today and in this discussion, we explore the role of civil society principally from that perspective. How best can civil society contribute to and be supported in contributing to the implementation of human rights at the national and subnational level? The role of civil society in promoting the implementation of human rights is context-specific and depends on numerous variables. There is, as has been said about many other actors, no one-size-fits-all. In some countries, there's an expansive civil society space. In others, civil society is severely restricted or limited to addressing only those issues and rights that the state considers non-threatening. Approaches taken to the progressive implementation of human rights and institution building differ from those that respond to human rights violations and seek accountability. Civil society takes different shapes in different places. While non-governmental organizations are an important part of civil society, labor unions, faith groups, professional associations, academic institutions, artists, journalists, and others can be important civil society actors. Civil society actors will often have specific interests and represent specific constituencies. They will not usually be concerned with the implementation of human rights generally, but with the implementation of specific rights or the rights of specific stakeholders. NGOs and other civil society actors come in many shapes and sizes and are often most effective when they work in coalitions or partnerships with others. In short, to repeat, there can be no one-size-fits-all approach to mobilizing and empowering civil society. There are many opportunities to draw lessons from the vast experiences of others. At the domestic level, NGOs and other civil society actors play a variety of different roles in different contexts at different times in the implementation of human rights. These roles include 1. Publicizing and popularizing human rights standards and the various UN and other recommendations and decisions and encouraging their implementation. 2. Engaging and influencing decision makers and other domestic actors within the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and statutory bodies. 3. Occasionally engaging and influencing international actors active or influential in the country, such as donors, partners in bilateral technical cooperation, OHCHR field presences, and international agencies. 4. Among the different roles that civil society actors can play, monitoring and reporting on the domestic human rights implementation at both the international and the domestic levels. And 5, occasionally contributing directly to human rights implementation projects, such as through expert guidance or as implementing agencies. Civil society actors can play some of these roles effectively individually or in coalitions and partnership with other civil society actors or with other participants in the domestic implementation process. The effective implementation of some roles would benefit from domestic bodies and processes that allow for coordination, where coordination is appropriate, and otherwise offer a forum for stakeholders to regularly share information, assessment, and plans. From this perspective, the emergence of national implementation, coordination, and reporting structures that we just heard about is a promising development for improving dialogue and cooperation at the domestic level for human rights implementation. Such structures can offer new venues to civil society actors to contribute to the implementation of human rights. Yet, if such venues, such structures, are to offer optimal conditions for civil society actors to contribute to human rights implementation, I suggest it will be essential that they be conceived to respect the independence of all civil society actors. Further, along the same line, given the important role of civil society in generating political will and priorities for change, including by stimulating political pressure, civil society actors will often make some of their most important contributions to human rights implementation working outside coordination structures. I believe that civil society will be best mobilized and empowered to encourage, independently monitor and encourage implementation of human rights if it has the space to act independently, including by deciding whether and how to work with other partners at the domestic level. To develop our understanding of the role civil society actors play and could play in human rights implementation at the national level, we need to expand our knowledge of what they actually do in different contexts around the world. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has published a useful resource, quote, How to Follow Up on the United Nations Human Rights Recommendations, a Practical Guide for Civil Society, end of title. It describes numerous ways in which civil society actors can contribute to implementing human rights recommendations that come out of the UN human rights political bodies and expert mechanisms. It provides many helpful broad brush illustrations drawn from national experience. Yet, we need to equip ourselves better to draw lessons from experience. The knowledge reflected in the OHCHR Practical Guide should be supplemented by more detailed descriptions of civil society experiences and case studies that enable us to draw evidence-based lessons about good practices and practices to be avoided. The Human Rights Council might consider requesting
One more minute, Peter. One more minute.
Okay. The Human Rights Council might consider requesting a report on the experiences of civil society in the implementation of human rights at the domestic level in countries around the world. Alternatively, the Advisory Committee could be asked to prepare such a study with the support of OHCHR. To better mobilize and empower civil society, we need to know more about what works and why it works. Just as a concluding comment, I think we've seen a reflection of this already in some of the presentations this morning. But at Glion, it would be good if OHCHR could describe how it draws and shares lessons about civil society engagement in domestic implementation efforts from the Office's experience in the delivery of technical cooperation within geographic regions and across geographic regions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I think I can see them preparing the lunch outside. We're meant to go until 1:30. We can go a little bit longer if people are keen and can hold back their appetites. But I can see we have already five speakers, and I'll jump straight in and we'll see how we go with the distinguished ambassador of China. Oh, okay. I saw one before the other, but that's fine. Please, go ahead.
China will wait longer.
Yes, China have not learned their lesson from Egypt.
Well, thank you very much. I join others in thanking the Ambassador of Morocco and the Mission of Morocco, and also university rights groups in organizing this opportunity for us. And also, I think the presentations from all those who, brought us insights which are very useful and which can shape many of our decisions and thoughts throughout this Glion process. I will go straight to the discussion of what I considered here as being the basics of what we could do in Geneva in order to grasp what is being done in individual countries, but also to cooperate with a view to establishing not only national systems, but cooperating with processes, strategies, as we saw delineated here today. Our national experience in this regard is very rich in the sense that recommendations emanated from treaty bodies and UPR within the whole of the human rights system have influenced and in fact they have geared the internal process towards the adoption of policies, mechanisms, legislation, and the guarantees of non-recurrence. In fact, our policies against domestic violence, fight against forced labor, protection of human rights defenders, protection of persons with mental disabilities, and all that is to do with transitional justice, they have been strongly triggered by these recommendations and decisions. And also, the other way around also happens, that in some cases we already have provisions for certain, the realization of certain of these recommendations. But the fact that they are reiterated, they consolidate the perspective of improvement that we would like to receive from abroad as a leverage for the internal process. Well, in the past decade, or beginning in the 90s, Brazil has engaged in wide consultation processes which are created with the basis of national documents which come from the active participation of local, internal regional institutions and come up to national levels. We are a federative system, therefore working in layers and bottom-up attitude in fact helps the national level of decision to go ahead. And such consultations, which have taken the shape of national conferences, are not alone in what we try to provide as listening mechanisms from, beginning with localities and moving upwards. We have worked on the establishment of councils which can be local, regional, state with a small s, state levels, and then up to the national levels. And these councils, they are of course integrated by representatives of local powers, national powers, but also from the communities themselves. And some of these bodies, such as the National Council on the Rights of the Child and the National Health Council, have not only consultative but also deliberative powers, and therefore playing an important role in terms of translating what we receive internationally into actions internally. One example I would like just to illustrate all this. During the last cycle of the UPR, we received 191 recommendations and we accepted 190 because one was against our constitution. And in fact, we could accept all these recommendations because the basic elements of these decisions and recommendations were already contemplated in actions in our National Human Rights Program, which is already in its 3rd edition. A last remark about this, I would like to refer to the resolution 30/25, which was an interesting experience developed by Paraguay with the support of the office here of the human rights, and which has inspired us already in the creation of a national platform to collect, cluster, and follow up the recommendations received. So one last word, we expect that the panel to be organized during the 26th session of the UPR can be important in initiating or inspiring or motivating countries in promoting these national consultations, which we deem very valid, with a view to coordination of these reporting structures. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Ambassador of China would like to go ahead now.
Thank you, Hani, for promoting me to the rank of